Welcome to CWS Christian Writing and Speaking. I'm your host, Jackie Wilson. And today's guest posed this question: how can you keep your faith in people after seeing the flaws of the American justice system? She wrote a book entitled Juror Number 11, exposing the flaws and weaknesses in the American justice system from the perspective of a murder trial juror who endured months of trauma, the threat of jail, and thousands of dollars in fines and legal fees because of them. But not only is she an author, she is an adoptive mother of children from trauma, an advocate for other children and adult victims of society. Let's welcome to the CWS stage, Miss Katrina Robertson. Welcome, Katrina.
Yes, thank you, Jackie. I am really excited to be here and just have the opportunity to share my story. I think sharing stories is so important. We learn more about ourselves, but then more importantly, I think others can learn as they listen to people's stories.
Absolutely, absolutely. And of course, our attention was immediately grabbed when we heard the title of your book, Juror Number 11. And it's like, oh, what happened? And so, Katrina, we want you to share your story about what led to you writing this book, but also how did you maintain your faith during such a difficult time in your life?
Right. So the book, I'll kind of won't delve into all the details of the book and leave that up to the audience on if they want to purchase the book and read the specifics. It's written in kind of a diary format. But as also was mentioned, I've adopted three children from foster care, but was involved in the court system as a CASA, a court-appointed special
Yeah.
advocate. And for a good part of nearly 2 decades had been involved in advocating for children and families. And so had seen a lot, experienced a lot. And then once we got to the place of actually bringing these children into our homes, it's one thing to read about children who have experienced unspeakable trauma. It's completely different to actually bring them into your home.
Mm-hmm.
The behaviors and the heartache and the devastation. And well, so I had been very open and vulnerable on like my social media and stuff, telling stories of what we were dealing with specifically with they're all boys, with these boys. And I think my transparency really invited people who were experiencing maybe not exact situations, but other hard of just reaching out to me and knowing that I wouldn't judge them. And throughout the years, I would have people tell me, you really need to just write a book. And I think part of that is I tend to, in written form, articulate my emotions fairly well. Well, then when I got called to serve as a jury member for this murder trial, small town in Arkansas, I it was a very huge responsibility on my shoulders, but also coincided with some very traumatic things going on with a couple of my children. Sometimes it seems like everything hits at once. So it was a very stressful ordeal, and to have the weight of deciding another individual's guilt or innocence and their sentencing and all that was very hard for me. And again, you'll have to just pick up the book to get the details, but I ended up with contempt of court charges because of some things that I had said. And then wound up with my own hearings that dragged out for 5 months, had the possibility of jail time. And then a judge actually granted a mistrial in the original murder trial. So it was just kind of like, I mean, just a horrific time in my life. And so I got to the end of it and I was like, you know what? I'm going to write that book.
Mm-hmm.
And so the book, even though it is Juror Number 11 and the story focuses on that whole experience, I take the opportunity to pull in the other things we were dealing with
Mm-hmm.
during that time, specifically with our children. And I know that one thing that people kind of throw around the phrase, God never gives you more than you can handle. And every time I'd hear
Uh,
that, I'd want to slap somebody around,
Not
because
true.
they quote it like they say it like they're quoting scripture. And I've never found that verse in the Bible about God not giving you more than you can handle. And I'm guessing Job would probably take exception to that. And I think Joseph would as well. Paul did. And then one of my favorite gals in the Bible, Naomi, she certainly was handed more than she was capable of dealing with. And I was asked to, right after I'd sent somebody he was a pastor at my early manuscript, and he had started reading it, and he said, I want you to come speak at my church, which was really overwhelming to me. Like I'm more of a writer, not a speaker. But I decided when I got up there to speak, the whole point would be that God absolutely does often give you more than you can handle. What's the point of God
Yeah.
if you can handle it all, right? And that my particular experiences are unique as far as especially the jury thing. Now, I do have a large circle of foster and adoptive moms who have been through just horrible things, heartbreaking things with their kids. But the truth is we've all had more than we can handle. Cancer is more than you can handle. Infidelity, caregiving. I'm now in the stage of caring for an aging parent and then also trying to parent adult children, which I thought toddlers were hard. No, it's the 18 to 20-year-olds who think that they've got it all figured out.
They think they know everything.
Oh
Yeah.
my goodness. So, there's, death, loss, grief, prodigal children, 101 other things in life that, and God doesn't expect you to handle it. And
Right.
I think that sometimes we feel like we're a bad Christian or doing something wrong when we feel those hard emotions of grief and sadness and depression and anger.
I mean, we're here on earth. This earth is imperfect, and we are imperfect people. And as a result of sin, we are going to experience things that just don't feel good. And like you said, what is the point of having God? That is where our faith has to come in, because we
Absolutely.
can't bear it all. We have to trust God to help us through.
Right, right. But I think sometimes we get stuck in this, we're telling everybody we're fine, but on the inside, we're like, does God really love us? Does he really see us? Does he really hear us? Maybe I'm not praying right. Or maybe I'm just not like all those other good Christians that seem to have joy all the time, no matter what. And, I'm a big feeler. I've got big emotions, and I've always kind of put them out there. And I've had a positive response to my book. And I think it's because I'm very vulnerable and transparent with
Mhm.
this is hard stuff. And that faith that I talk about is, I learned that true faith is trusting God, even if, we have our prayers and our things we cry out to God for, but faith is saying, God, I still trust you, even if. And that's a hard place. When you read through the Bible, I mean, the Psalms especially is just full of David specifically just crying out to God during some hard times. And in the book of Lamentations, to lament specifically is to cry out and grieve. And I think sometimes rather than having the faith to cry out and lament, basically kind of sit in your pile, we just become silent. We quit speaking to God. I think it's better that I mean, God invites us to air our grievances. Our pastor at our church that my husband and I attend, he's one of those kind of energizer bunny type pastors. He's um, always positive, always optimistic. I mean, he's a great guy. Everybody who meets him, I mean, you just can't help but to love him. But in the midst of this particular really hard time in my life, I was sitting in church, and his sermon specifically was how you need to be thankful and appreciative and be grateful and all that. And I sat there and I was like, gosh, there's something wrong with me because I'm just not there. I know the truth, right? But my feelings are contradicting the truth of what I know. And he had even mentioned Job. in the sermon. And I went home and I was like, goodness, Job is definitely not somebody to talk about if you're going to preach about being optimistic and positive and thankful. Because when you go to the book of Job, I went and I find him weeping, wailing. He cries out to God. He says, God doesn't hear me. God can't hear me. He says, God must be out to destroy me. God's blocked him. God tears him down. I mean, I'm kind of like if I was Job's wife or friend, I probably would have ditched him too because they got tired of hearing all that. But Job, he was an honest guy and he spoke what he was dealing with. And God was okay with that. And of course, we know the end of the story. God restored him, even though he really did a whole lot of angry yelling at God. And but like I mentioned at the beginning, one of my favorite characters that after listening to that sermon, I wanted to go back and read her story was Naomi. Naomi is kind of hidden in the book of Ruth. We all know Ruth and her love story and her loyalty and all that. Everybody loves Ruth, but we forget about Naomi. If you know the story, Naomi and her husband have to leave the land because of a famine. They get there, and Naomi's husband and her sons die before they've had a chance to even bear children.
Yes.
And she hears that there is the famine's over. And so she's going to go back to her land. But by this point, she's kind of a cranky, bitter old woman. And her daughter in law, Ruth, says she wants to go with her. And she's like, why? Why do you want to come with me? But for whatever reason, Ruth was faithful. They get back to the land, and her old friends greet her excitedly, which kind of gives you a little insight. She probably was a well liked lady
Mm-hmm.
there in society. And her response, and I'll just read the verse. She says, the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Lord has brought misfortune upon me. The name Naomi means pleasant and gentle. And she obviously was not feeling that. And so I was kind of like, I get it, girl. I feel it. That she was real and vulnerable enough to speak what she was saying. And I don't want to use up too much more of the time, but what's real interesting about the book of Ruth is it kind of starts with Naomi in the first chapter and then it ends. The book closes with Naomi, where they those same so the entire book of Ruth is Ruth's love story with Boaz, and then at the end of the book, these women who had greeted her and obviously didn't judge her for her, I'm a cranky old woman, just leave me alone, didn't judge her, still came back and showered her with blessings and encouragement. It says, the woman said to Naomi, praise the Lord who has not left you without a family redeemer today. May his name become known well in Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. Indeed, your daughter in law, who loves you and is better than 7 sons, has given birth to him. Naomi took the child, placed him on her lap, and cared for him. The neighbor woman said, a son has been born to Naomi, and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. And I think, kind of at that moment, as that baby was placed on Naomi's lap, she was able to finally breathe that exhale and say, yes, God is good. And then if you follow the genealogy, she's right there in the genealogy of Christ, even though she had her a little pity party and sat in her ash pile for a little bit. So I, I think that's, been a big part of my faith journey is just, it's okay to feel those feelings, but continue to stand on the truth, even when the feelings don't match up with it.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue that people have is being honest. Not only being honest with other people, just not being honest with themselves. And it is okay to have feelings. And I tell people all the time, it's okay to be angry. It is what you decide to do as a result of that anger, what determines whether or not it's sin. Being angry, feeling emotional, those are not sins.
Correct.
And I think
Correct.
people feel embarrassed because they're thinking, oh, I'm not strong enough. But it is that attitude that separates us from God. Instead, what did he tell Paul? Paul was talking about It is in his weakness that he is strong. Because guess what? He's depending on God. And it sounds like
Correct.
to me how you maintained your faith through all the things that you went through is you were just very honest about how you were feeling. You were crying out to God. And then you allowed God to answer you, obviously, because you're on the other side of it. And I think people don't think about it. You are going to get to the other side of it, but you have to allow God to do the fixing. And a lot of times we try to go and do the fixing ourselves.
Exactly. Right. And I think sometimes we kind of get stuck, kind of along the lines of what you were saying. There's absolutely nothing wrong with those emotions, but sometimes we get stuck there. And that was kind of, the one of the themes of my book is to rise. When the subtitle, rise from the trials of life. That to allow yourself to feel those emotions and to speak what you're feeling, but then, okay, then you make that choice that I'm going to get up and keep putting one foot in front of the other, anyway, because at the end of the day, I still know and stand on the truth that God is in control and God loves me no matter what it is that happens or transpires. So I got to keep going. I've got to keep loving. I got to keep growing. I got to keep building, but don't be afraid of the feelings.
Yeah, it's the demonstration of your faith. And I often tell people that you show your faith in the doing. You show your faith in getting up, saying, I'm choosing to go forward. I'm choosing to trust God. I'm choosing to believe that it's going to get better. And you're right, you can't stay there. You can't get stuck because see that is of Satan. He wants you to get stuck because you're not growing,
Right,
you're not moving like you
right,
need to, you're not fulfilling the purpose that God has called you to. So he's sitting back laughing at you while you're, saying, I just don't know what to do. Yeah, you do know what to do. Stand up and move forward. Even if
right.
it is just putting one foot in front of the other. Nobody said you have to take big leaps, you know?
Correct,
Faith is
correct.
what? The size of a mustard seed? A grain of
Yeah,
a mustard seed. And mustard seeds are really, really small if you ever
right,
looked at one. And
right.
so all you need is that grain of faith. And that may be, you know what? I'm feeling terrible today, but today I'm going to get out of bed. Today I'm going to take a
Absolutely.
shower. Today I'm going to cook a meal. Today I'm gonna pick up just the living room. So as we look at the broken system that's before us, there's so many things that are broken in our society. But we don't just stop because it is broken. We as Christians, as people of faith, we have a very clear choice, and that is to trust God and to continue forward because He may eventually use you to help unbreak certain things, but He can't use you if you stay down.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, Katrina, what is next for you?
Well, my profession, my real job is not that of an author. I'm actually a financial advisor and investment manager. So, I mean, really, and that's what I've been doing for 15 years now. So, I mean, that will continue on. I won't say I'll never write another book because I had no intention of writing the first book. So if the opportunity, presents itself, then I'll certainly do that. But in my book, I'll give you just a little bit of the plot twist in that. So the defendant in the trial, a woman, older woman that had she shot and killed her husband. So that was the murder trial. We've actually developed a relationship and a friendship now. And in my book, for the most part, it's children that I really felt was where God had my husband and I in ministry. But it seems like that chapter is kind of coming to a close, but kind of like the defendant here and from that trial that I served on jury duty, I've had multiple older women that God has brought into my life to help house and minister to. And so seems like that's kind of what God has next for me is helping these older women that are in need. But I never know day to day what's going to be thrown at me. I just kind of take it as it comes.
Yeah, that's life. That's life with God. How can people connect with you and your book?
Well, the book is available on Amazon for the most part. If you do a search, Juror number 11, and that's hashtag 11, it should pop up. The subtitle is A Memoir of the Broken Justice System and Rising from the Trials of Life. So, pretty easy to find that way. There's hardback, paperback, Kindle version, and then I also did an audiobook. So, if a lot of podcast listeners or maybe audiobook listeners, full disclaimer, I recorded the audiobook myself, and I'm certainly not a professional narrator, but it was a project I wanted to do on my own since it was my story, wanted to tell it in my voice. So there is an audiobook out there. I don't have a website or anything, but I've had multiple people find me on like Facebook and reach out to me. If you do search for Katrina Robertson, maybe add Arkansas in there. There's not a whole lot of us. You can find me pretty easily.
Katrina, as we wrap up your interview, what is your final word to the audience? We've talked about faith, hardships. What do you want them to live by today?
My goodness, I've kind of already mentioned it, but I would say don't stop. Don't stop. Loving people a lot of the time is going to lead to hurt. Don't stop loving people. You can pour your heart and soul into a marriage and have a spouse walk away. Don't stop believing in the goodness of people, having a hope and faith in God. You may have a child that walks away and shows no indication of coming back to the truths and the foundation that you built for them. Don't stop having faith and having hope and praying. You might build a business that you pour everything into, and it falls apart and puts you in financial ruin. Don't stop building. Don't stop creating.
Yeah, I love it. CWS audience, you have heard her. Don't stop. We've already talked about our faith is in the doing, even if it's something very, very small. You don't have to take huge leaps. Maybe it is just putting one foot in front of the other. Maybe it is just getting out of the bed that day. Whatever it is, make sure you are exhibiting your faith. You are a child of God. And we got to keep moving forward because God has so much for us to do. We are purpose, and we are not purpose unto ourselves. We are purpose to do great things in the name of God. Let's go forward, people. And until next time, God bless.